Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Addiction Talk. My guest tonight, his story is so impactful because he went through so much in his life, hit rock bottom, but he did not stay there. He did not let addiction and mental health keep him from living out his dream. He's now celebrating more than 6 years of sobriety. Listen to his story. Adam Paul Hicks is a multi-talented actor, rapper, singer, and songwriter who rose to fame at a young age with numerous TV and movie roles, including the Disney series Zeke and Luther and the film Lemonade Mouth. But behind the scenes, Adam faced several personal tragedies, including his mother's battle with MS, an eventual passing, his brother's prison sentence, and the loss of his best friend to an accidental drowning. He also battled addiction and mental health challenges and spent time behind bars. Today, Adam shares how he turned his life around. Addiction Talk starts now. And we're joined by Adam Hicks, who's all the way in Los Angeles to hear more of his story. Good to see you tonight, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Adam, as you were sitting in the green room and you see your story, as we replay what you've been through in your life, what was the first thing that kind of came to your mind?
Just it's been a long journey. It really has been a very, very long journey. I've learned a lot. I started at a very young age. As an actor, I started acting at 8 years old. So my mother actually heard auditions on the radio, and she took me down to the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. And at first, it was just like a hobby, and I was always comfortable in front of the camera, though. It was always a way to express myself. And I started writing music at a young age, too. So those were my outlets. It was always music and it was acting. And it started very young. And then it became a full-blown career and an amazing passion of mine.
So you go from this point of having this career that starts when you're 8 years old, and we see that you rise to fame. What was that like to have to deal with that? Was that stressful? Did you have challenges that you faced?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I definitely had a different childhood for sure. I feel like the biggest thing when I was younger was just the schooling, like how to figure out how to, navigate schooling, because I was always in LA, either going on auditions or working. And so I had to find the right school to kind of work with me. And then around, 15 years old, I signed with Disney for Zeke and Luther. And then I kind of just remember my life just being, constant work. I mean, we shot 2 episodes every 9 days, 12-hour days, promotions on the weekends. So I just remember my childhood just being a lot of work, honestly. Yeah.
So how did it get to the point of you starting to self-medicate? Did you start self-medicating because of the stress of everything you were dealing with as a young childhood actor? Or when did that start and what kind of precipitated it?
So this is how it happened. I'd always suffered from anxiety at a very young age, just severe anxiety. I remember my first panic attack. I was like, 8 or 9 years old, sitting in a restaurant, and I went into this panic, and my dad had me go into the bathroom, lay on the floor, and do breathing techniques. I had always suffered from anxiety, and even at a young age, I was kind of trying to find outlets to cope with this anxiety. And obviously, being an actor, a child actor, it did added pressure for sure. I don't want to blame the industry and say that, it was the industry's fault, but it was a factor and it did play a role in my anxiety. And ultimately, I started to find, different outlets. And the first one was alcohol. I started drinking around age 13 because I felt like it worked. I mean, I just did. I kept it a secret. And then it slowly progressed into constantly drinking, consistently drinking, and just not getting enough of the alcohol. And then my dad had been prescribed Xanax for 30 years. he's still on benzos to this day. So seeing that he used Xanax for, anxiety, I went down that same path. And at first it kind of started where I was, drinking and then hungover, and then I would take anxiety, take the Xanax for the anxiety of the hangover, and then it progressed into mixing Xanax and alcohol, and that's when things started to really get out of control.
And when you say things begin to get out of control, how would you describe out of control for you?
Um, so basically, what had happened was is that I'd been suffering from addiction and mental health issues for a very long period of time, but my personal life fell apart, and it played a major factor. And I don't want to use like my mental health as an excuse for my actions, because I do take full responsibility for what happened, but it did play a big factor. And yeah, so I basically was progressing, doing Xanax, doing alcohol, drinking, and then my personal life fell apart. My brother crashed. He ended up going to prison. My dad was not in the picture. My mother ended up passing away randomly. She had suffered from MS for a very long time, and she ended up having a heart attack. And one minute I was talking to her, the next minute I was in Vegas by her bedside, holding her hand, and we had to pull the plug, and she literally passed away in front of me. And so she was like my best friend. So um, basically I was struggling from this addiction, and my personal life was falling apart. And because it was falling apart, it was fueling my addiction. But I felt like this switch after my mother died. I felt like the alcohol and the Xanax, and it started to affect me differently. It wasn't the same buzz, it wasn't the same drunk. Now I was extremely emotional when I was drinking. Now I was going in and out of these delusional episodes that were happening on a continuous basis, and to the point where I was in a full blown psychosis, and I just did not know how I had gotten there, or where I was, or what was going on. Because once you're in it, it's hard to differentiate. And then next thing I know, I'm arrested. Um, I'm sent to sent to LA County jail. And for the first 3 months, I didn't even realize like what exactly my charges were. I was just waiting for a lawyer to come talk to me. And because of how I was acting, they red flagged me when I first got to LA County jail, and set me up with a psychiatrist to talk to a psychiatrist. So I waited a couple months to see the psychiatrist. And when I ultimately ended up seeing him, he deemed me incompetent to stand trial, which means I could not stand trial because of my mental state. So they took that information, they sent it back to the judge, and the judge wanted a second opinion. So he sent another psychiatrist to come evaluate me, and he also deemed me incompetent to stand trial. And then ultimately, the DA, the district attorney, wanted a third opinion, and so he sent another psychiatrist, and he also deemed me incompetent to stand trial. And at that moment, I was deemed incompetent to stand trial, sent to Metropolitan State Hospital, where I was put on court-ordered medication, and that's where the recovery and the journey really started, and the realization of what had happened really set in.
Well, I wonder how, knowing that your mental state during that time, how did you end up still going to prison?
So basically, it was a long, long process. I was incarcerated. I went to the hospital for about 6 months. Then I had to start the process over. So I had to go back to LA County Jail. Um, and COVID was going on during the time. So everything was slowed down. So the process was really drawn out. People were not going to court. They were just kind of doing video conference calls. So it was a very long process. And ultimately, they sent me in a deal. I had waited 4 years for this deal. And at that point, it'd been such a long process that, I just accepted it and took the deal. And that's what it was.
So when you look at that, and I think that's a very important point because a lot of people, we hear a lot of people talking about should we be sending people who are struggling
Right.
to jail or prison versus treating them. And it seems like early on they were like you needed the mental help, but then you spend, I understand, like more than 4 years in prison. What are your thoughts around that when you think
Okay.
about how our
Right.
country
I mean,
handles
one thing
this?
I've learned just being in the system in general, it is very, it's a broken system. I mean, it is. Don't get me wrong. People who commit crimes deserve to go to jail, but there has to be a rehabilitation process, and I just don't see that rehabilitation process. Especially when I was in there, I met a lot of people. There's a place in LA County Jail called the Twin Towers where they house all the mentally ill people, and you would go on the bus with them. And I mean, these people are gone.
Mm.
They they don't have a voice, and they're stuck and they're fighting for their lives. And a lot of them have been there many, many years, in a 6 by 9 cell, 24 hours a day. And just seeing that and not even knowing that this world existed beforehand, you know, was just a big eye opener on how broken the system is. There needs to be a lot of change, honestly.
Because when you look at your own self, did you feel like what you really needed is you were crying out for help? That you really just
Definitely.
needed help, that there had been so much in that addiction, you were dealing with this disease and you didn't even realize it. And on top of that, having the psychosis. Did you feel like people don't understand that people were struggling with addiction and mental health issues, that it's not a moral issue, that they really just need help?
They definitely need help. I mean, you know, these things are a progression, especially with addiction. I mean, it progresses, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and to the point where things like this happen. And yeah, just seeing that process and trying to understand, like, coming to terms with the fact, because the realization moment for me, like rock bottom for me, was coming from the hospital back to a 6 by 9 cell, coming to the realization of everybody that I let down, the people that I'd affected by my actions, how sorry I was, and having to deal with this situation and understand that this is my fault. I allowed myself to get to this situation, but if there would have been someone that intervened or someone that helped me during this process, I just didn't have a lot of help. And I don't know if it was because I was just trying to deal with it myself because it was kind of embarrassing. It was something hard to talk about. I felt like I had control of it. I really did. I felt like I had control until I had no control at all and I had no idea what was going on. And it happened very, very quickly. you know um I was sustaining, and then I was just terrible. And 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 just coming to the realization of all that was rock bottom for me. The people I let down, the people in the industry, and having to deal with that situation, and try to figure out what I was going to do from here on out.
Mhm. And when you think about that rock bottom moment, but also having to deal with that publicly,
Right, yeah. it,
how
it's
did you how
it's
do you even process that? Because at the same time, now you're in prison and you're dealing with everything that happened as a result of your addiction and the psychosis, and also you're seeing all these stories in the news about yourself and what you
it's
did.
hard. It's hard. It really is, because people don't like to talk about these things. I mean, they really don't. This is, it's personal, but it's also, I've found it that, these are things that I need to talk about. I need to talk about my story because I know I will be able to relate to somebody. I'm trying to talk to people who've been formerly incarcerated, or people who haven't been incarcerated and just don't know about the system. Just bringing awareness to the whole situation was something that I really wanted to do. And yeah, dealing with it publicly is probably the hardest thing, but I try to block it out, and I just try to
Mm.
focus on bettering myself.
So you during that time are like, okay, I'm not going to focus on what other people think. I have to focus on what's going on with me now. What gave you hope?
So the hope was, after the hospital, I was sent back to LA County Jail, and just sitting there, back to reality, back to understanding the gravity of the situation, which was astronomical. Um, the hope came that, I started to think clearly and started to think
Mhm.
there was light at the end of the tunnel. I was going to be able to get out of here. Certain people, they're not going to be able to get out of there, and so there was those blessings too. And just understanding that I was going to be able to get out and bring awareness to my situation was a big motivation for me.
Mhm. Help us understand the gravity of what you were dealing with at that time. Because you said the gravity of it all. I just want people who maybe didn't see all the headlines and that to understand the gravity of what you were dealing with.
The gravity of the situation, I mean, it was being in a 6 by 9 cell 24 hours a day, handcuffed everywhere you go, not seeing the sun for 2 to 3 years. um, because I was in high power. So what that means is, because it was broadcasted everywhere, they put me in a cell by myself. And
Mm.
so, coming to terms with the gravity of the situation, I mean, the living conditions in LA County Jail are absolutely terrible. The food is terrible. The people in there are very, very sad people, and so just having that around you 24 hours a day, it's really a different life. Like, inside is a different life. And me coming to terms with the gravity of this situation, and like I said, the people I let down in my personal life, my friends, my family, and the industry, and the people I'd hurt and affected by my actions, um, like I said, was just rock bottom for me.
If there was anything you could have said to your fans during that time, because they're hearing, that there were criminal things, robbery, things like that, what did you want them to understand? What do
I
you wish?
really wanted my fans to understand that I'd been suffering a long time.
Mm.
Um, this had been a progression. This had been something that had spiraled out of control. And, people see things like this for what it is. People have opinions and they're open to their opinions. But things like this, there's reasons behind why things like this happen, especially in my case. And I just wanted to be able to, tell my fans that I'm sorry that, I let them down. That was a big thing, because of the shock of it all. I'd been trying to deal with it personally, and I just couldn't deal with it personally anymore. It just exploded in my face.
Wow. But to see you here now, you've been out a year and a half. You have more than, I guess, near now 6 years of sobriety.
Yeah.
So tell me how through all of this you found your path to sobriety and what you're doing now to keep yourself from going back to a time in your life that was so dark.
So sobriety is the only way I can live. It personally is. And as far as my mental state, I can't deal with drugs, alcohol. I can't do any of that. I've put up so many barriers in my life to make sure something like this never happens again. As far as just, I'm on medication. I do therapy weekly. Um, I have a very small group of friends. I don't live that lifestyle anymore. As far as the party lifestyle, that's a big thing. I don't go to bars. I don't go around. I mean, I try not to go around, a lot of smoking and anything that is an influence. I try to stay away from. And so, it's not easy. If for me to tell you it's easy, it's not. Because especially when you live a certain way for so long. But I met a lot of people in jail who said to to me, "Look, man, this saved my life, man."
The
Like,
jail?
jail saved my life. And I honestly resonate with that so much, because I honestly feel like it saved my life. It turned me into a direction of complete sobriety, complete focus, being clear and level headed for the first time, and not living unhealthy. Like, I was so unhealthy. When I think back on how unhealthy I was living, it just gives me chills. It really does. And so, realizing that, and also being forced to get sober because I was in
Mhm.
jail, forced to get sober while being in jail, forced to be put on medication, which helped me immensely. Forced to, because I had really not like understood a lot about myself. I had spent so many years just intoxicated and in this drug cycle and this mental health, cycle that I didn't have a lot of clear moments. And I felt
Mhm.
like for the first time in my life, sitting in a cell, I had these clear moments and I really learned a lot about myself for the first time in my life, you know?
And in
Um,
that moment, what did you learn about yourself, Adam? Because you had been through a lot. I mean,
yeah,
your mom had battled MS, and then you were there when she passed away. Then on top of that, you had your brother who you said he was in a car crash. His girlfriend was killed in that, and then he went to prison. And then you had a friend who had an accidental drowning who
right.
passed away. So there was just so much. So when you were sitting in that cell and also going through that, did you have to process all that grief too?
Definitely. I had to process the grief, and that's exactly what it was. It was to process all of this and think about it clearly with a clear level head. And be able to for the first time in my life figure out the changes I was going to make sure something like this never happens. You know, um, I feel like that was the major thing for me was just trying to figure out what I needed to do to make my life better, my personal mental health better, and live a sober life, which was the three things that I was really focused on while I was in jail. Because I wanted to get out and I wanted to live a better life and be able to express myself in these ways.
So when you got out, how did you deal with the guilt and the shame and all of that, and deciding that you were gonna go back into entertainment? Because you could have,
Right,
after all of that, I mean, you're in the
right.
public eye. At one point, you're like, this childhood star and people are looking at you, and then you go through all this and having to deal with the criticism. But how did you deal with that guilt and shame and say, despite everything and everything that's been reported, I'm going to still go after my career and I'm going to process that guilt and shame and not let it stop me? How do you even get there?
I think honestly, for me to say that I'm over it and on it's always there as a reminder. I mean,
Mm.
just it's always there as a reminder. It's there as a reminder of how bad things can get for me. And it's been a drastic thing in my life that has really helped me move forward. Um, but yeah, I think it's something I want to do what I love. I just want to live a happy life. I want to do what I love. I love to act. I'm good at it. I love to do music. I'm good at it. So these are the things, and these are the only ways that I know how to express myself. I've been doing it my whole life. And so to come out and just stop, I would have no reason to live. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And so I need, for myself, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to get out. I was going to get back on track. I was going to get back motivated. I was going to show the world my story and exactly what happened and not try to run from it. You know what I mean?
Did
Because
you
things
face
like,
backlash
huh?
initially? Did you feel like you got any backlash when you tried to audition or go after things? Did you feel like there
I
was
feel like
some?
everyone's going to have their their own opinion, and obviously, the backlash was mostly people putting out information that wasn't necessarily either true or to the full story. But those things are going to happen. It's the entertainment world. It's going to happen, and so you just have to accept that off tops. But I feel like yeah, me getting out, I just made a commitment to myself that I was going to bring more awareness to these kind of situations, because you gotta understand, things people hit rock bottom every single day. I mean, things like this happen all the time. I mean, it's not that they happen all the time, but things like this happen, and it's it's something that when people look at it, they might not know the full story, and that's why I'm blessed to come on a shows like Addiction Talk and just explain my side, because I know it's going to resonate with somebody. I know somebody is going to be able to maybe get a little bit of hope through my story, and if that one person gets a little bit of hope, then it's all worth it.
Yeah, I think that is so impactful and why we do addiction talk. So, thinking about that as we come to a conclusion, in talking to you, Adam, this has been so insightful. But also, I wonder, what do you, if there were lessons or things that you hope people take away from your story, what would
Definitely.
that be?
Um, First of all, self medication is never the answer.
Mm.
Um, I thought it was for a very long time. It's just not the answer. Um, also these things are a progression. I wish I got the right psychiatric help. I wish I got the right, professional help, and I didn't. And so I think people looking at this, there are early signs with addiction, and I feel like if you do have those early signs, you definitely need to get professional help because it can spiral out of control, and I'm proof of that.
And you end up doing things you never
Right.
probably imagined that you would do in your life.
Can't even imagine. Exactly. And it makes you and it turns you into somebody you're completely not. And and it's just needs to be spoken. People need to talk about it. I mean, people don't talk about addiction as much. People don't talk about mental health as much. And these are serious issues, especially when you go to a place like LA County Jail and you see how many mentally ill people are in there, and how many. I mean, there isn't enough transitional housing. I mean, people who commit crimes deserve to go to jail. Don't get me wrong, but they're still human beings, and there has to be a rehabilitation process. Otherwise, these people get out, they're felons, they can't get a job, they go back to addiction. Next thing you know, they're back in the system. And
And getting to the root,
right,
understanding for a lot of people, like you said, this started at not, as a
right,
young child. You're a
and
teenager when
right,
this started
exactly.
for you.
And so this was a slow progression. And if I could give advice, those are the two things: to see the early signs, because I had so many early signs that I just didn't know were early signs. And before I knew it, it was out of control. And also to not self medicate, because I was a believer in self medicating for a long time. I didn't want to tell people about my problems. You know what I mean? I just didn't want to do it. And and getting that help at a young age probably would have saved me from everything that I went through. So, early signs are definitely something people need to look out for.
And what are those early signs that you ignored?
Um, just I mean, there was a handful of them, but I mean, I think suppressing, like bottling up my emotions, not dealing with my emotions, wanting to be detached from my feelings was a big one that I suffered from, because my anxiety was out of control. I was on TV constantly, and I was trying to cope. I was trying to cope and trying to figure it out. And it was a hard process. And at the time, I didn't really know what was happening. I just knew that this was an outlet and it worked. And then one day it didn't. And, here we are now.
So what's next for you, Adam? I know the strike is over. So for
Yes.
actors, I know that's a big deal. Are you looking at projects? What's going on with you? Where are you in your music world? And how can your fans support you now?
Well, I'm definitely back into acting. I'm actually attached to a project. It's a pilot about veterans and mental health. So I'm attached to that. So I'm very excited about that. I also have a nonprofit that I started called Soundtracks of Life, which is mental health therapy through music.
Mm.
So I just launched this. This is for people who are formerly incarcerated, or people just suffering from mental health issues or addiction. Um, we're gonna open up at a couple locations, and we're gonna get some programs going, and we're gonna try to help people before it gets to this point.
Because I know music has been a part of your journey, a big part. You were in prison, you were writing songs about your journey and your addiction. So being able to use that transformative power of music to help others, I can only imagine how impactful that is going to be. And how can your fans support you? I know you didn't tell us the name of the film coming out, but what can we do to support you and encourage you in your sobriety?
I mean, I get so much love. Like, it's as far as support, just support my channels. I drop a lot of music. Go on my Spotify, Adam Hicks. Check out my music. It's real therapeutic for me. I love to do it. Support me on TikTok, on my Instagrams, Real Adam Hicks, and yeah, just see my journey, and hear my story, and learn from it, and also you can support me by you know just being a fan, and understanding my journey. I feel like that's a big thing.
Yeah, like giving you a second chance, giving you another
Right,
chance.
right.
Right? That's really
Yes.
big because What my final question for you, who are you today? You know, I know you've been through a lot. A lot has changed you from going through the addiction and now going through time in prison. How would you describe who you are today and what's life like for you in sobriety?
Today, I feel more mentally healthy and more physically healthy than I've ever felt my whole entire life. Look, it's just such a blessing because it's like this. It's like your personal life, if you're struggling in your personal life, but your professional life is doing great, how long can you sustain, you know? And so
Mhm.
now I feel healthy for the first time in my life. I'm not waking up hungover. I'm not thinking about alcohol. I'm not thinking about, Xanax. I'm not thinking about any of that. It's so far gone out of my mind. And it's been so long, now with my sobriety that it's the only way I can live. I don't like feeling mind altering in any kind of way. I just like to feel level headed, and I like to feel like, in touch with my realities, and yeah. And like I said, I met a lot of people in jail said this saved their lives, and I really feel and I really resonate with that because I feel like it did save my life. I don't think that the addiction would have stopped unless it was forcefully stopped, and I was incarcerated. I don't think that I would have, got the right mental health treatment, and I don't know how it would have ended if it wouldn't have ended the
Mhm.
way it did and restarted, And so it's this full circle that I went through. Um, and coming out the other end of it and just looking back on it, like I said, it's always there as a reminder of how bad things can get, and it'll never get that bad again.
It will never get that bad again. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being so transparent and for
Yeah, no
sharing your
problem.
stories. And we're certainly rooting you on in
Thank you
your
so
new
much for
roles
having
and
me.
everything. And we're excited about what's going to be ahead for you. So,
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
and thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of Addiction Talk. Good night.